Hi and welcome back. So last video we did the very first of our CSS styling, but we're not really going to get too caught up in that just now because we're going to be using a framework that will simplify the styling process called Bootstrap. And instead we're going to try and make our form do something, which is log in a user. So let's go into our app.py and define a new endpoint. So I'm going to say app.root/login. And now this /login is going to get the contents of that form, get the email and password, and log the user in if they are valid. So remember, we have to define a method that will get called when that login endpoint gets reached. And in this login user method, I'm going to say email is request.form email, and I'm going to have to import this request from Flask. There we go. And password is request.form/password. Now, email and password have to be the two fields that we have in the login form. So let's go and check. Okay, email and password are here, but they are IDs. So instead of ID, we're also going to have to use name. And that is simply so we can associate these values with a specific field name. Okay, let's go back to our app.py. And now we've got here request.form and then email. So a request is simply something that is incoming to our application. So the website is going to make a request to our application. And in this request, the form is going to send some data. And the data the form sends in Flask is always inside the request.form dictionary. So now we've got here a dictionary that contains all the data inside the form, and we're going to access the name email and the name password. Okay, so then what we'll do is if user, import that, login valid with this email and password, then we'll say user.login email. Okay, and then what we do at the end is return render template, like profile.html, for example. And we haven't made this page just yet, but we will make it. Okay, so to recap, we're getting the email in a form and the password as well, and then we are checking that the login is valid and then logging in the user. Remember, this sets the session email to be the user's email, and we've looked at it before. And finally, once that session email is set, we return render template. In normal circumstances, we would do something else if the login was not valid, such as tell the user the login was invalid and then redirect them to the login page again. But for the sake of simplicity, let's leave it as this just now. So once the user is logged in, we want to render this template. And what we're going to do is say we want to render this template, but we want to render the template with some data that is coming from the application. So we're going to say email is session email, and we'll have to import this as well. So what is this? What's happening here? We're calling render template like we did before, but now we're giving it something else as well. Well, we didn't know this was a thing that you could do, but actually it is, and you can give a render template function any data that you want. So we can just separate with commas more and more data that we want to pass this template. And now that means that this template here has access to this email variable inside it, and that email variable contains the session's email. Okay, so that sounds confusing enough. So let's go and create our profile template. And notice, just like before, I'm going to go into the login and select everything and copy that and replace it here. And now instead of a form, of course, we want to say something like H1 stands for header 1, hello, and then email. Okay, so header 1 is the biggest header you can get in HTML. It is essentially a big title. And then we're going to say hello, and then inside these two curly braces, we're going to put the Jinja variable, that is email. And that variable was passed here. And that should contain the session email once the user has logged in. Okay, but right now we don't have any users in our database, so we have to do that first. So the first thing to do is going to go to my terminal and say db.users. Let me check that is the correct collection. db.users.insert, and I'm going to insert email is test@test.com. Password is just going to be password, and that's it. So we've inserted that, and we've got the email and the password. So let's go back to our app.py and see what happens. So the first thing to do is actually rerun the application because we've changed the endpoint here. So we'll rerun that, go into Google Chrome, refresh that, and then test@test.com password. And hurrah, we've got our data up here on the URL. So the form is thinking that it has to send data to itself, and this is the default behavior for a form. So we want to tell it, no form, actually you have to send data to a different place, which is where the data is expected. So we're going to go back into PyCharm, go into the login form, and say action is /login, and then it will send the data over to this page. So when we do this, we're actually going to get a small error. So let's go in here, refresh that, and type again. And we get a bad request. So why do we get a bad request? And the truth is, we are sending, well, even without worrying about the bad request, really, we've got a bigger problem than the bad request. But it turns out that solving this problem solves the bad request as well. We've got the problem that we're sending a password here through the URL. And this is probably the least safe thing you can do. This is the most unsafe thing you can do on the internet, which is send a password unencrypted as plain text on the URL. So turns out that these form datas shouldn't be sent like so. Instead, they should be sent hidden. So we'll access this page, sending the data a different way so that it's slightly safer. And the way we do that is using a post request instead of a get request. So if we say method is post in the form, and then we go into our app.py and say methods, and then array, list posts, and this will say we're accepting only post requests on this endpoint. You can say this, get and post, and then we would accept both get and post, but we're only going to accept post because the form is only sending post messages right now. Okay, and then we'll go back here into our form and try again. Okay, so now it did something, but we're getting a none type error. It's not subscriptable. And that means that we've tried to access something as if it were a dictionary, but it was a none. And indeed, if we go into here, we can see that we're trying to find one from a database subscript collection, but it says none type is not subscriptable, which means database.database was null, or was none, in fact, for Python. So we haven't initialized a database, basically. That's what this is telling us. And indeed, we didn't. So we should do that. We should initialize a database. So let's initialize database. So we'll define a new method called initialize database. And what this will do is it'll say database dot import database initialize. So when do we call this initialize database? Well, we want to call it before we make a request to our application so that we have access to the database, right? Well, fortunately, Flask has something like this, which is this other decorator at app dot before first request. It will run this method before the first request. So basically we'll log in, but before logging in, it's going to initialize the database. And then if we log in again, the database will already have been initialized and we will not reinitialize it. Okay, let's restart the application and try one last time. Okay, the session isn't available because no secret key was set. So it turns out we have to set a secret key. And what is a secret key, you may ask? And really, a secret key is simply something that Flask uses to make sure that the data that we're sending the user in the form of a cookie, and we've briefly explained what that was in the when we looked at sessions, is secure. So we need to set a secure secret key here. So we do that with app.secretKey, and we can set it to wherever we want. So right now I'm not going to set it to a very secure one. However, if you are using this on the internet, you should set it to a secure one. Okay, let's try one last time and see what happens. Alright, so now we've logged in. Finally. So as you can see, this is the exact process that every programmer goes through when they are making their application. So nobody knows exactly what to do every time, but you read the feedback that the application gives you and you react to it. So we had a few problems along the way, but they were all solvable as long as you read it and try to understand it, try to understand the computer. It's trying to communicate with you. It turns out it doesn't do that very well most of the time, but it tries. And now we finally managed to log in. Okay, so what happens if we log in with a username that doesn't exist? Turns out we still get that. And why? Because the session already exists for this browser. So Google Chrome in my laptop already has the cookie that tells Flask that I'm logged in. So when I access this page, it sees that my username is wrong, but it doesn't do anything. So it still logs me in as the user that was already logged in before. So what we want to do is, if the user's login is not valid, then say session email is none. And of course we want to put this in an else, because if not, that will always happen, and we don't want that. So if the user's login is valid, log them in, and if not, set the session email to none. Okay, we'll have to restart the application, and then go into login again, and now I'm going to log in again as an incorrect user, and now it says hello none. So evidently that is not ideal, but we can now work around that. So that's a separate problem, what to do when the username is wrong, which would be to unset the email, redirect them to the login page, show them an error saying your email was wrong, try to log in again please. That would be what to do. Okay, so a long video describing an end-to-end deployment of functionality. We've changed the login form to ensure that it's sending data as a post, which is slightly safer. We've changed the login to ensure that it has the post, and we've added the login details to request.form gets data sent from the form. We've checked the user's login is valid, and then we've logged them in, which means setting the email in the session. And then we've ensured to unset that so we can't access somebody else's account, and if the username is wrong. And finally, we've rendered the profile.html template, passing it some data here, which is the email of the user. So a lot of things have happened in this video, and this is one of the first end-to-end deployments of functionality in this app. So hopefully you didn't find that too overwhelming. But of course, you are welcome to come along and ask questions, and I'll try to help you as best I can. But if everything was okay, then we are going to be moving on and allowing users to register. So I'll see you in the next video.